Forum, hosted by the SCOV Government Affairs Committee. Due to COVID-19 safety concerns, this forum is being conducted entirely via teleconference. We will record this forum so that you and those who are unable to join us live will be able to view this later via YouTube. My name is Al Johnson, and I will be the moderator for this forum. I'd like to thank the candidates who are with us today for sharing their views with Sun City residents. And I'd like to introduce them now. So we have
JoAnna Mendoza
and Dr. Felipe Reyes Perez.
Oh, Sun City.
There we are. Unfortunately, the Republican candidates, Vince Leach and Mark Finchem, declined to participate, and Bret Roberts did not respond to our invitation. At the end of this video, we will be posting information about voter registration and voting for this election, and links to more information about each of the candidates. Please allow me to quickly provide a little bit of the background and explanation of the forum rules as defined in advance by the Government Affairs Committee. First, the committee has allocated roughly 60 minutes for this forum, and our timekeeper, Earl, will be helping us stay on track with gentle reminders. Number two, each candidate will be provided with 2 minutes for an opening statement. Number three, the committee has crafted questions for the candidates and solicited questions for this forum from our residents via This Week in SCOV. Fourth, due to time and staffing constraints, our audience will be unable to ask questions during this webinar. Number five, both candidates will have a minute and a half to answer every question, and I'll alternate who will get to answer first. Number six, each candidate will be provided with 2 minutes for a closing statement. So let's get underway with opening statements, and the spotlight to start off with will be on you, Dr. Perez.
Thank you, Al Johnson. And thank you, Sun City, for taking the time to watch this podcast. My name is Dr. Felipe Perez, and I'm running for Arizona State House of Representatives. I grew up in Arizona. I went to school in Arizona, and now I'm raising my family in Arizona. I currently serve the people of Arizona as a board-certified family medicine physician. I also founded and direct a program that trains the next generation of family medicine doctors here in Southern Arizona. Growing up wasn't easy. I grew up in poverty in Somerton, Arizona, a small town surrounded by lettuce, citrus fields in the southwest corner of our state. In middle school, I remember reading the front page of our local paper with the headline that our middle school had ranked as the poorest school in Arizona. However, from an early age, I decided that I wanted to improve my life. I started working as a teenager, sometimes full-time while attending high school. I learned the value of hard work. I also knew education was the right thing for me. And despite all odds, I was able to graduate from high school, graduate from community college, and I graduated from the University of Arizona with 3 degrees, including my Doctor of Medicine. The reason I'm running for office is the same reason I became a doctor. I want to help people live long and healthy lives. And as a physician, I know the deficiencies in our healthcare system and how they negatively impact so many people. My priority is to change this. We need to increase healthcare coverage and make it affordable and accessible to everyone, especially in rural areas. As an experienced physician and community leader, I want to bring my medical training and life experiences to create real, pragmatic, and sustainable solutions to improve healthcare. So I ask for your vote. And what your vote will represent is to ensure health and bipartisan representation at our state capitol.
Time.
Thank you. And now, Ms. Mendoza, your opening statement.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much, Sun City, and thank you, Al and Don, for hosting us and moderating. So my name is JoAnna Mendoza. I am running for Arizona State Senate, Legislative District 11. I'm a small town kid born and raised in our rural communities in Pinal County. I grew up in poverty, working alongside my parents who were farm workers. And I make it a point to share that story because it is the story and the struggle of many of our families still living in the district today, actually living across Arizona and our nation. At a very early age, I answered the call to serve my country and served in 2 branches of service in the United States Navy for 1 enlistment. And I served a little over 17 years in the United States Marine Corps. I've been forward deployed to combat environments like Iraq and Afghanistan, and I've led in a variety of difficult positions. I've held a variety of different difficult positions and have led in a variety of different difficult situations. I've also had the honor of and privilege of continuing to serve my communities after retiring from the Marine Corps as a school board member in my small rural school district, and also as a congressional staffer for Congressman Tom O'Halloran. And it was there that my eyes became open to how much our communities were struggling. And I decided to jump in. The reason that I'm running is because I am tired of the absent leadership that we have seen in our district for far too long. As you can tell, myself and Felipe are the only 2 candidates here today. I want to bring responsible and responsive government to our district, and I want to put our communities and people first. Again, I fought my way out of poverty. I fought to protect our constitutional rights as a United States Marine, and I will fight for the people in our district as your next state senator. Thank you.
Okay, JoAnna, since you're all warmed up, we'll give you first question. Would you actively work toward Arizona ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's definitely long overdue. As a woman myself, I have seen the struggles that women face, especially in the workforce. You know, we do have quite a high number of women who are also single parents that are the sole providers for their families. And so it's absolutely imperative that they have equal pay, just like their male counterparts. So I would absolutely support that.
Dr. Perez, would you support the Equal Rights Amendment?
I absolutely support it. You know, our federal representatives passed it many, many years ago. This should have been done in Arizona back in the 70s, if not sooner. I would definitely be very supportive. I do want to bring this back into the focus and have other states as well rectify it, because we need to pass this. I absolutely support it.
Okay, we'll move on. And Dr. Perez, it's your turn for the next question. What is your position on Proposition 207, the legalization of marijuana, with respect to Arizona law enforcement, judiciary, mental health, education, motor vehicles, state revenues, and costs?
Yeah, thank you for the question. You know, Prop 107 is a piece of policy that was put in place by our voters. In Arizona, one of the neat things that we do have and we need to protect is that if our citizens are not happy with our leadership in state government, they can introduce their own initiatives. And that's exactly what they did. They introduced 207, 208. You know, I think it's important that we have that option. I think whether or not this is a bill that passes is up to the voters. We all have say whether this goes forward or not. What I do want to say is we do need to decriminalize marijuana. We need to make sure that we are in control of this substance, and that if there's any chance of creating additional funding for the state, we should definitely look into that. But I think it'll be ultimately to the choice of their voters that they will decide whether or not 207 passes.
JoAnna, where are you on the question of legalizing marijuana?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think what's important to capture is that it would decriminalize marijuana. You know, our prison system is overwhelmed as it is, and we definitely don't need folks who have been charged with just having marijuana on their person or using it and throwing them into our prison system. Again, our prison system is extremely overwhelmed. So I think that's the important thing to capture about 207. Additionally, there are safety precautions. I know some folks have mentioned that they're concerned about what this would mean for our children, but there are processes in place that would ensure that there's no marketing towards our teenagers or our children, which is absolutely important to capture. And lastly, it does provide an additional source of revenue for the state. As we look at recovering economically from COVID and what has happened, we need to explore additional sources of revenue to stabilize our economy. So I think that this is one way that it will do that. Not to mention that, the initiative did get enough signatures to get on the ballot, which means that folks in Arizona are supporting it.
And while we're talking about propositions, JoAnna, there's another one on the ballot for the voters, 208, which provides for new taxes to benefit teachers and education in Arizona. Since the goal is to improve education, what are the metrics that need to be put in place to justify the expense?
The expense in terms of, I'm sorry, I don't understand your question, Al. Are you saying whether or not there's the expense that's going to be incurred by 208 or?
The expense to the taxpayers, the cost to the taxpayers.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I want to make sure that I understand the question so I can respond accordingly. So I do support the Invest in Ed initiative. Again, I think it's important to capture that it did receive enough signatures to get on the ballot, which again, folks across Arizona are supporting that. It's important to make an investment in our teachers. It's an investment in our children. It's an investment in our future. Right now, we have over 1,700 teacher shortages. Teachers sometimes, as a school board member, I know that teachers have to work multiple jobs in order to make ends meet. They don't stay in Arizona because they are not paid a livable wage. So we absolutely need to invest in ensuring that our teachers get paid a wage that will, number one, allow them to remain where they are so that we have some consistency in our public school system, and two, so that they don't have to take on additional jobs in order to make ends meet themselves. So in terms of taxpayer dollars, this would would implement a tax on, again, the top wealthiest earners in Arizona. It's an individual tax, I want to remind folks, and not a tax on small businesses.
Dr. Perez, where
Yes,
do you
thank you
stand
for-
on Proposition 208?
Sure, absolutely. This goes back to our ability as citizens in Arizona to be able to initiate initiatives. This is a strong message that our state leaders at the Capitol have failed us. So voters, just like you and I watching, have taken it upon their hands to do this because it is important for a lot of folks in Arizona. I'll say, our government has been decreasing funding for public education for a very long time. They do need funds for infrastructure, for recruiting, making sure teachers getting paid adequate salaries. I think this is a great way to do it. It only charges a charge to a very tiny few folks that are on the top level of an income. It does not affect corporations or businesses. I think the matrix to really use are the ones that are important. That is teacher retention, teacher recruitment, students' performance, and class size. We need to decrease those class sizes. And I'll tell you why it's important. I grew up, as I mentioned, in poverty, and I've experienced poorly funded education and good funded education. What made the biggest difference in my life was the good education.
And while we're talking about education, the next question is to you, Dr. Perez. Beyond 208, do you believe our educational system needs additional funding? If so, how do you propose to provide for that funding?
Absolutely. So, a lot of folks in Arizona have identified education as being a big priority in our state. And I think this is because folks are realizing how poorly funded they've been. For many, many years, it's been reduced and reduced and reduced. And what this has caused is it's causing educational disparities, especially in rural areas, underserved areas. They have been severely underfunded. And every child in Arizona, no matter where they live, needs to have the opportunities that I had when I was growing up. Because their success is our success, it's community success. So I think we need to fund our schools fully so that we can meet those matrices. We need to retain more teachers that are certified. We didn't have that at our school. We need to make sure they have the proper learning resources, especially during a pandemic where a lot of them are dependent on technology to attend class and learn. So I think we need to just look at the budget and make sure that we are fully funding schools so that we're making a big impact on those matrices that I mentioned.
JoAnna, do you believe that additional funding would be necessary, and how would that money be derived?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, especially during COVID, we have to look at every social program to include public education, everything that is budgeted at the state capitol. My concern is that there will be efforts to try to continue to reduce the amount of money that we're sending into public education, which is absolutely imperative to our economy and our economic recovery. We can't look at these issues in silos. We have to look at these issues as affecting each other. And if we don't have a strong COVID response to ensure that our businesses are operating, to ensure that we're trying to get back to some type of normal as much as possible, it's going to affect funding across the board. Now, there is, again, we talked about the initiative, 207, that would provide additional revenue. Also, additionally, we need to look at modernizing our tax code. We need to stop giving tax breaks to corporations that we're not seeing a return on investment on. Those no longer serve us here in Arizona, so we need to take a look at those tax breaks that we're giving, and we also need to modernize our tax code.
Okay, and while you're in the spotlight, the next question. In what situations do you believe it is appropriate to issue bonds or increase taxes?
Yeah, again, that's a really difficult question to ask. I think that because we have not had a coordinated response here for COVID, and actually, we've seen it come from the top down, that there's just been this lack of information, lack of coordination. States are doing a variety of different things. And here in Arizona, some counties are implementing mandates that would help keep people safe and others are not. So I think before we even start looking at anything about increasing taxes, because certainly if taxes are increased, it's going to affect working families. It's going to affect those that can't afford it. And so we certainly don't want to put an additional burden on them when they're already experiencing challenges to surviving COVID. So I think first and foremost, we need to address the COVID issue. We need to have a coordinated response before we start looking or even thinking about trying to increase taxes for anyone.
Okay, Dr. Perez, the tough discussion when we talk about taxes. Do you believe it's appropriate to issue bonds or increase taxes?
Absolutely, good question. I agree with JoAnna that I think increasing taxes really hurts a lot of the working class folks. And I also think that we need to be prepared for unexpected things, just like we are in our homes. We have a saving account, kind of like what we had with COVID-19. And I'll give you an example of taking the unemployment benefits in Arizona. Currently, Arizona has the lowest number or the lowest amount of funding for that program that is federally allowed by our federal government. And that is pay as you go. That really got us into trouble with the pandemic because we lost a lot of jobs. So we decreased the number of folks paying into that system. So I think we need to adjust taxes to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our communities, our state, but then we're also planning for that rainy day. And that was critical in the pandemic because Arizona had $1 billion in a rainy day fund, which our incumbents argued against. They thought that was too much. They wanted it gone. They wanted that money to go back somewhere else. And what would have happened is Arizona used those $1 billion for the COVID-19 response. So I think it's important that we're funding what we need, but then that we're also planning for those rainy days. Because it's important for the economy, for folks, safety, all those measures. So I think it has to be based on what the need is.
Dr. Perez, this is rainy day time, COVID-19. Our next question comes right off of what both of you are talking about. It's very possible that there will be some possible revenue shortfalls as a result of COVID-19. What are you thinking, if elected, how you would deal with it, the shortfall?
Absolutely, a question. You know, I think there's no doubt on anybody's mind that we are going to have a budget shortfall come next year because of the pandemic. I think we could have done a lot in Arizona to try to minimize that economic impact, but our state leaders failed us. We should have taken the pandemic and learned from what had happened to other countries, other states, before we had it in Arizona, and take precautions to make sure that we kept our numbers low. Wearing a mask. Wearing a mask is very simple. There's evidence for it very strongly that if everybody just wears a mask, we can decrease the transmission of the virus to other folks. So that's one thing. We could have minimized that impact, but our state leaders failed us. And these are tough times for everybody. I remember my parents trying to struggle between filling up the gas tank to buying groceries, paying bills. It was really hard. And similarly, we need to be critical and put all options on the table next year and just be critical and think, what do we have coming in? What do we have going out? And make those tough decisions to make sure that all voices are at the table. We need to represent all the voices. And I won't be afraid to look at short-term and long-term issues. I won't be afraid to make those tough decisions for our district and prioritizing people's health and livelihoods.
And JoAnna, it's a tough question, but how would you address the possible shortfalls on how the state would have to deal with the finances?
You know, I wish I could say that I had all of the answers. Again, if elected, I would be one part of a whole. If we are in the majority, there's already solutions that are being put on the table to address some of these issues. So, I mean, I'm not going to come with some grandiose idea to fix problems when there's already ideas that are being presented at the state legislature that have not been able, or I should say that have been introduced that have not been able to be implemented because those bills can't get heard. Again, the shortfall is really going to determine how we get back to work. Are businesses able to open? What safety precautions are being put in place for consumers and employees? What are we doing to ensure that we stabilize the economy right now? That is what the shortfall, how big that is going to really be determined by our response. And we've seen that our response is being piecemealed. Again, it's not coordinated. I would like to say that there should be a mandate for masks, but I think that most people understand that the science behind wearing a mask does support that it will reduce COVID spread. So again, how big the shortfall is going to be determined how we respond together collectively as a team, as Arizonans to COVID.
Moving on to the next question, and you're still up. A little difficult in light of COVID-19, but here's the question. What are your prioritized infrastructure improvements or additions the state needs to provide for future generations?
So, you know, it's really hard to look forward when there's so much on the table right now, when there's so much that needs to be done to address COVID. And my concern is that we're going to be in this situation for a couple of years if we don't get the elected leadership in office to address issues. I'm hesitant to say that I would work on, you know, a variety of different things because COVID has been first and foremost on my mind since it first started. And the reason being is because this hit home very closely for me. My mom, who is a frontline worker, was exposed to someone who had COVID and was diagnosed officially with COVID. It took her 2 months to recover. So, again, I think we need to address what is happening here and now before we can even look forward to addressing a lot of these infrastructure issues that we know need to be addressed, but we need to concentrate on how we're going to get folks back to work, how we're going to ensure that folks are safe and operating safely, especially employees who are frontline workers. So I'm sorry to say, but we have to address COVID first.
Dr. Perez, you have that question. How would you prioritize infrastructure improvement additions that the state needs?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I would agree with JoAnna that one of the things that we need to do now is try to minimize the impact of COVID-19 at this time, because it is critical. We've already lost a lot of time in being able to manage it. I think it is imperative that we try to manage this virus quickly so that we can get our economy back on track. Because if we can't do that part, just like JoAnna said, we can't really invest or prioritize infrastructure in the future because we won't have the funds for it. Once we do that part, what I think we need to do is we need to make sure that we're not leaving our future generations in debt, and that we are not neglecting infrastructure at the expense of all those infrastructures that have been neglected for years, like our schools, and then they have to pay for it in the future. So I think it is important that we look at now, make sure we minimize the economic impact of the pandemic, get the economy back on track, open up businesses fully instead of how they are right now at a limited capacity. And this has to happen only by managing the pandemic. And then we can look at the infrastructure, making sure that we are investing in our future, because it currently is not being done.
Okay, we're going to change gears, Dr. Perez. What is your position on tourist revenues versus residential growth to promote economic development?
So Arizona has over $1 billion tourist business, I would say. And I think it is very important that we protect that income that benefits all Arizonans. I don't think there has to be either tourism versus more development. I think what we need to do is protect Arizona's prizes that we have that bring tourism here. And we look for locations to build in other areas that won't impact that business. I think they're both good for the economy. And I think they can both function in harmony without really stifling one another. So I think it's just protecting both of them.
Okay, JoAnna, what is your position on tourist revenue versus residential growth to promote economic development?
Yeah, that is a tough question, especially right now operating in a pandemic where, tourism has decreased greatly, right? Folks are not traveling, they're not taking those vacations as much. But I think one thing that's important to capture is that folks come to Arizona because we have beautiful desert landscapes. We have beautiful saguaro deserts. We have land that needs to be preserved and taken care of. I guess one of my concerns about residential development, while we know that there are some areas, especially in rural areas, that desperately need affordable homes, affordable living homes, right, conditions, there is a concern that would impact some of our natural landscape in our environment. We know there's a water shortage in Arizona. We have to be very careful about ensuring that we preserve that. And right now, we don't even know how much water we have because we are not allowed to measure that. So I think that before any development occurs, we need to figure out where we are with water preservation, and we need to take into consideration our beautiful desert landscape, our land that folks come from all over the world to see.
JoAnna, the next question rolls kind of right off of this. What should Arizona do differently to protect the environment for future generations?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on that a little bit. I think that we need to ensure, first and foremost, that we're identifying, and I tie water into the environment all the time. It's part of its life, right? We need to identify what our water shortage is. We need to figure out where we are, how much we have left. We also need to ensure that we protect our public land by not selling it off, ensuring that we're preserving our environment for future generations. You know, one of the reasons I stepped into this race is because I firmly believe that it is our responsibility to leave a legacy that is better and not broken for future generations. We know that climate change is real. I mean, the fires that we've seen across the West Coast are an example of that we've seen here in Arizona. So we need to ensure that we're addressing climate change and that we're addressing the water shortage and that we're protecting our public lands.
Dr. Perez, now your turn. What
Absolutely.
could Arizona do differently?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I have memories of growing up in Arizona. When I was a kid, I was swimming in the Colorado River. I remember seeing my first deer in the Cofa Mountains. I mean, we do have such a beautiful landscape in Arizona. I also have experienced working as a physician in South Tucson, folks who had healthcare that their healthcare was negatively impacted by toxic waste that was dumped in South Tucson side many years ago. So I think it is important that we are making sure we're doing everything to protect our land, our water, our air, so that we don't have to look back years later and find out that there was a contamination where people ended up with healthcare conditions that cut their life short. So I think it is absolutely imperative that we are using research data to make sure that we are protecting our land, water, and air.
Probably one of the biggest questions that all that are running for elective office will be getting. So now it's your turn, Dr. Perez. In this time of great divisiveness, please give examples of how you have or will work to cross party lines.
Thank you. You know, I've been in healthcare for a very long time, and we have a lot of folks on the team. We have physicians, nurses, respiratory technicians, we have our medical staff that helps us. And it is crucial that we all work together as a team to have the best patient outcome that we can have. It's imperative. Unfortunately, we don't have that up in our state capital, but that is what we need. So I will focus on building relationships with all members of our state house, regardless of party affiliation, regardless of their opinions or their views, because I think it is important that we all come together and make decisions for our communities that are the best decisions that we can make. And that comes out of collectively having everybody have input into policy and making sure that nobody is forgotten when those policies get created. So I will aim to work in a bipartisan manner. I am an independent thinker, and I will work across aisles to make sure that we do the best thing for Arizona.
JoAnna, please give examples of how you have or will work to cross party lines.
Thank you for the question. I spent 20 years in service to our country. 20 years, training, deploying to combat environments, working with folks on a team that I may not necessarily have always agreed with, may not necessarily have always gotten along with, to be completely honest. But because of the mission that was at hand and because of the immense responsibility to take care of the Marines that were entrusted in our care and to bring everyone back home from that combat environment, we had to work together. We had to balance the mission for success while ensuring that we were taking care of those that we've been entrusted to care. So I have 20 years of doing that. That's 20 years of experience in trying to figure out how we can find common ground, where we can collaborate, where we can work together. And so my focus moving forward as the next state senator will be to do that. I've made a pledge to meet with one legislator from across the aisle once a month, whether it's going to lunch, if we can, hopefully after COVID, or meeting via Zoom, to also partner with a member of the other party on legislation. Where can we find common ground to work together?
And now we'll move to the next question, and it's still your turn, JoAnna.
Mhm.
Do you think it is possible for voters to make informed decisions when so much of the big money supporting candidates and propositions comes from undisclosed sources? Do you think this should be changed, and how?
Yeah, I mean, the public trust has been destroyed. What we've seen over the last couple of years is that folks don't trust their elected officials. And a lot of that is because you have some elected officials who will say something and do another. Their actions don't mirror their words and vice versa. They're not leading by example. We definitely need campaign finance reform. We need transparency and we need accountability. So one of the things that I would propose would, in terms of rebuilding that public trust, would be ensuring that there's transparency, making sure that my calendar is available for all the constituents so they know who I'm meeting with. We know that a lot of times the big money that makes their way into politics is from lobbyists who are meeting with elected officials. I would also work to pass some type of legislation to ensure that former elected officials cannot become lobbyists, which we have seen in the past. And quite frankly, that is adding to why why people don't trust their elected officials.
Dr. Perez, on the same question, do you think this should be changed, and how?
Yeah, absolutely. As a physician, I take great strides to make sure that my patients can make informed decisions by getting them all the data that they need, discussing what the options are so they can make the best decision for themselves. Unfortunately, we don't have that in our state government right now, or our federal government. There's a lot of money that's coming from many different sources where they're not required to disclose who it's coming from. I think voters will make a much better decision or informed decision if they know when they get that piece of information, they know where that money is coming from. So I would be supportive of policy that really creates transparency so that voters can see who is the people or the persons paying for such literature to be passed out.
Okay, now we're going to move on, and we've already talked about it a little bit, talk about water, which of course in Arizona is a key discussive item for many people. How do you propose to meet Arizona's current and future water requirements? And the question is to you, Dr. Perez. What measures would you propose to support and meet those needs?
Absolutely. Arizona is definitely a beautiful state, and we're blessed with many natural resources. Water is definitely a limited resource that we have. It is important for day-to-day living. It is very important for a lot of farmers because it is their livelihood of their crops. And I'll tell you, when I was a teenager, one of the jobs that I did while I was in high school, I irrigated fields. I would go and water citrus trees in the middle of the night. So I understand how important it is, because if that lifeline of water is cut to our farmers, they could lose an entire citrus field that took them 20 years to get to that point. So I think one of the first things we need to do is really get more data, more research on how much water we have, making sure that we are making measures or taking measures to make sure that we have sustainable methods of using that water. Because on the flip side is if we don't do that, farmers can be left without water. So I think we need to start metering. We need more research. We need more bipartisan support on this issue to making sure that we are using water wisely and that we can ensure sustainability for our farmers and our communities.
JoAnna, what measures would you propose and support to meet the needs and the future of water in Arizona?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for the most part, folks realize that there is a water conservation issue, not just in Arizona, but globally, right? One thing that I would really like to see happen here in Arizona is to prevent foreign entities, foreign corporations and organizations, or foreign agriculture corporations from coming here and drilling deep into the ground to pull out our groundwater. Right now, there's no legislation that would prevent that. As a matter of fact, it's still happening. A couple of years ago, there was a lot of research and a lot of articles that was done on entities coming from overseas to grow crops here and dig deep into the ground to pull out that groundwater. And there was no one stopping them. So I think first and foremost, we need to ensure that the water that we have in Arizona is for Arizonans and that is used by those in Arizona, by our farmers, by those in the agricultural fields, by the residents, the citizens here of Arizona. And secondly, there's already been legislation that was introduced this last legislative session that didn't get anywhere about metering and about identifying how much water we have left in the ground. I think that's absolutely important to do in order to find solutions for how to address the water shortage.
And JoAnna, while you're at the microphone, a similar type question. What specific measures would you propose to encourage conservation and alternative renewable energy and technology such as solar and wind to meet Arizona's increasing energy demands?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now during COVID, one thing that COVID has shown us is not only just the gaps throughout a variety of different industries like our public school system or healthcare, but also where we can make improvements and where there's room for innovation. And I think that definitely delivering clean energy jobs is one thing that we can do. You know, in order for change to be lasting and enduring, we have to do it in small increments. To think that we're going to pull the entire system out and start anew is not realistic. What I would like to see in terms of clean energy is first starting with our schools by implementing electric buses. There are initiatives out there through programs like Chispa who have already thought of this idea, who are already implementing it in different states. We know that children who suffer from respiratory illnesses, it's increased by the carbon emissions coming from these buses. Secondly, I would like to ensure that as a state, we're leading by example and that we're using clean energy in our buildings, solar panels, anything that we can do to ensure that we're setting the example for other industries to then follow.
And Dr. Perez, the topic. What would you propose to encourage conservation and alternative renewable technology, solar and wind, to meet the increasing energy demands of our state?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So, this goes back to really what I spoke about earlier, was not leaving our future generations in debt. I think it is important that we look for other renewable types of energy, because the ones that we're using now, even though they have benefited us for a very long time, they are limited. And we will have to make that switch eventually. This last year, there's a lot of data going back many years. Last year was one of the hottest years in the history since we've been keeping data. Now 2020 is on the path to beating that. And so it's real changes that we're seeing in our climate. I think in the long run, if we don't address it now, it's going to be more expensive if we don't address it now. So I definitely want to incentivize clean renewable energy. There's a lot of great ideas out there, from electric vehicles to putting more solar out there. I think it's the right thing to do. And we need to really take that and create a business model in Arizona so that we can all benefit from it.
Okay, Dr. Perez, the next question comes up for you. What is your position on additional funding and protection of Arizona state parks, monuments, wildlife refuges, and other public lands?
Thank you. I think these places are landmarks in our state. I think they're important. I think they bring a lot of tourism, but then also it's our home. I think what we need to do is make sure that we are providing the right resources to make sure that we're maintaining them. And it goes back to some of the other stuff that I've mentioned, is we cannot neglect the infrastructure. We cannot neglect our wildlife at the expense of our future generations. We need to create real, pragmatic, sustainable solutions so that those pieces of Arizona can remain for us for a very, very long time, so that future generations can enjoy them just as we did.
And JoAnna, same question. What is your position for additional funding for our parks, monuments, and public areas?
Yeah, Al, I talked a little bit about this for, public education, is that we need to modernize our tax code. We need to take a look at some of the corporate tax breaks that we have been giving for years, for decades, and are not seeing a return on investment in these tax breaks. We need to ensure that we're pulling those back so that we can find additional sources of revenue to fund the programs that we have across Arizona, from maintaining our public lands and parks to ensuring that education is fully funded. But again, and I hate to keep saying this, but the reality is that unless we get the pandemic under control and we have a coordinated response, we're going to continue to see that budget shortfall increase, and we're not going to be able to provide funding for programs that desperately need funding. So these are not just separate issues that we need to address. They're issues that are tied into the bigger issue, which right now is COVID response.
And JoAnna, a hot button topic you get first crack at. What is your position on Arizona's current gun laws? If changes are needed, what do you propose?
Yeah, I served 20 years in the military. I had to qualify twice a year. I'm qualified in several different weapons systems. I actually, as a drill instructor, I taught marksmanship to recruits in recruit training. So I am not opposed to the Second Amendment. I fought to protect the Second Amendment. I believe that everyone has the right to protect their homes and their families. But there are issues with firearms getting into the hands of people who should not have them. We need to ensure that there is, I would support legislation for national background checks. I would also support legislation to ensure that guns in homes with children are locked safely. I know how to fire a bunch of different weapons, but I do not have a weapon in my home because I have a 4-year-old and he's very active and curious. And for me, that's very concerning. Hence why I don't own a firearm in my home. But I think that there needs to be some protections in place for children in homes with firearms, like the Be Smart program.
Dr. Perez, what is your position on Arizona's current gun laws? And if changes are needed, what would you propose?
Absolutely. So, I support the Second Amendment. I think people should have the right to own firearms, but I also feel that we need reform in that law to make sure that we are keeping guns in the hands of law-abiding citizens, and we're keeping them out of the people that shouldn't have them. So I think one of the things we need to do is really look at reform the laws on who can buy one, because currently right now anybody can go buy a firearm. You don't need a background check. So I think we do need to close some of those loopholes to make sure that we're keeping guns out of bad people's hands and making sure that we are protecting the rights of people who are law-abiding citizens.
Okay, Dr. Perez, for you, how should we balance tax incentives and budgetary realities when encouraging new businesses to come to Arizona?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Arizona, currently, Arizona gives more tax breaks, incentives than actual money they bring in. I think there is value to incentivize a company to come into Arizona. That creates economic growth in your state. But then those tax breaks need to be reevaluated, and there has to be a sunset to it. There has to be where we say, business is doing well, we give these incentives. Now it's time for that business to give back to taxpayers. So I definitely support incentives to create economic growth, but then we also need to revisit those incentives to make sure that taxpayers are getting their return.
JoAnna, how would you balance tax incentives to encourage new businesses coming to Arizona?
By fully funding education. We know that an educated workforce is tied into the economy, and more corporations and businesses will want to come here if we have the educated workforce to fill those positions. These, again, Al, these are not issues that are in a box by themselves. These issues are all connected and affect each other. This is why I'm a big supporter of the Invest in Ed, because we need to make that investment in our education system, and really so that our children can stay here. If they have a good public education system and they can go on to maybe learn a skill or a trade because maybe they don't want to go to a 4-year institution, then they're going to stay in Arizona and get a job in Arizona by having to leave Arizona because they can't get a job here. So education is very much tied into the economy. The other thing that I would really like to focus on is making sure that we're providing tax incentives for our small businesses. We need our small businesses to succeed. They are the backbone of this nation, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of them. So before I would even consider any incentives for corporations, I would definitely take a look at how we can support our small businesses across Arizona.
Okay, and let's now move on to the next question for you. How do you feel about imposing laws on HOAs that may go contrary to their HOA governing documents?
That's a great question. Can you give me an example of one?
Well, there's been some examples. We do not have an issue that I'm aware of.
Mm-hmm.
But there have been some issues throughout Arizona where state it becomes interested in a regulation or rule that is contrary to the rules in which an HOA was incorporated and started. So it's a conflict between the rules of an HOA and what the state wants to now impose. Now, I can't give you an example because I'm not aware of any of Sun City, but there are some in the state.
Yeah, I mean, and for that issue, I would be interested in sitting down with communities that are affected by this. You know, I think one of the responsibilities of an elected official is to make themselves accessible to their constituents, to be able to address issues that they're seeing in their communities. Unfortunately, right now, we don't see that. We've had failed leadership in this district for such a long time, and our elected officials are not accessible. As you can see, they're not here. So I think first and foremost, elected officials need to make themselves accessible to their constituents to talk about issues like the one that you mentioned, Al. If they don't have access to their elected officials, then how do we know that these issues are concern? So, you know, I think that my answer to that is ensuring that folks have access to who's representing them so that they can share issues and concerns affecting them in their communities.
Dr. Perez, you get this issue, which is more complex than a number of them. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about the conflict that may exist between state requirement versus HOA governing documents?
Absolutely. You know, I've experienced this myself. I was president of my HOA for many years. I served on the board. And I understand how HOAs really want to do what's best for their community. One of the things that we always struggled with was, is this even legal to do? So I think HOAs, although they mean good, they have good intentions always, we got to make sure that there's guidelines there for them to make sure that they're not violating people's rights or the Constitution. So I think when HOAs are violating the Constitution, then the state needs to step in. But other than that, I think HOAs are driven by their citizens, by the people that live there. If they want to come up with certain rules in that HOA, it's fine, but as long as it does not infringe on people's rights.
Okay, we're down to our last question. And Dr. Perez, we've gone full circle from our first question, way back just about an hour ago, to this question. How will you, if elected, advocate for quality early education for the children of Arizona?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this is a great question. You know, as a physician, I see a lot of folks from young families. I see geriatric patients. I see newborns. One of the biggest impacts on somebody's life is making sure they have access to educational resources as early as possible. The research is there. It is a very good investment to invest in young folks early on, and then we have those benefits, long life benefits that benefits all of us. So I definitely support having preschool that starts way sooner than what we have now. I support having full day kindergarten because those are investments in our people, in our youth, in Arizona They're the next workforce of Arizona. And the research shows that it's an excellent investment. So I definitely support it.
And now I'll give JoAnna the same question. And while we're doing that, Dr. Perez, you can start to prepare your closing comments. So I'll read it again, JoAnna. How will you advocate for quality early education for the children of Arizona?
You know, Al, as a mom of a 4-year-old who lives in a rural community in Red Rock, at our school district here, we do not have a preschool program. And I think that that is an indication of how severely underfunded our public education system has been for decades. We have rural communities throughout Arizona. Of course, my focus is here in District 11 that have early childhood and childcare deserts. I think that we need to identify where those resources are lacking, like districts in District 11. And we also need to ensure that we have voices sitting at the table that are going to fight for these issues. As a mother, I understand this issue firsthand because it has affected me personally. We need to ensure that we identify the shortages, and we need to ensure that we're incorporating early childhood education because it is the foundation for how a child will learn and be successful throughout school into the public education system and fund it. It is also part of our economy. We have a lot of parents out there who want to get to work and can't because their children do not have access to early childhood education or child care programs.
Okay, JoAnna, I'll give you a 2-minute break so you can think about your closing statement. And we're down here to the end. Dr. Perez is a candidate for the House, just to make sure that everybody knows which position they're going for. So, Dr. Perez, the clock is on you. You have 2 minutes to wrap yours up.
Absolutely. Thank you again, everybody, for attending today. Thank you, Don, and thank you, L. Johnson, for putting this together. My name is Dr. Felipe Perez, and I'm running for state representative in LD11. I grew up and I went to school in Arizona, and now I'm raising my family in Arizona. I currently serve the people of Arizona as a board-certified family physician, and I also am training the next generation of family doctors in Arizona. The reason I'm running for office is the same reason I became a doctor, because I want to help people live long and healthy lives. And I'm frustrated because there are countless folks that are negatively impacted by our broken healthcare system. My priority is to change this. As a state representative, I will fight to improve healthcare affordability and accessibility, especially in districts like 11 that have an urgent need for doctors. Also, we're living through a global health pandemic. I'm even more frustrated by the incumbents' failed leadership in managing the public health emergency and protecting the lives of our citizens. Their failures have cost lives and livelihoods for so many individuals and businesses. It didn't have to be that way. I think we can all agree that it is time for a new bipartisan leadership for LD11, a new vision for Arizona, and a better way forward. As your state representative, I will bring my medical training expertise to create real, pragmatic, sustainable solutions and improve your healthcare. Stand with me and let's fix healthcare together. Vote for Dr. Felipe Perez to ensure better health and a bipartisan representation in LD11. Thank you, folks.
And JoAnna Mendoza, candidate for the state Senate. You're on.
Thank you so much, Al. And thank you, Sun City, for hosting this Q&A forum. I was really happy to be here and answer questions. You know, I have a life of service, a service to our country, serving in military uniform and forward deployed to combat environments. I have led in different positions and challenging situations. And what Arizona needs right now is a leader who understands how to balance the mission for success and take care of the people that they have been entrusted to serve. And I will be that servant leader. I will be present. I will ensure that constituents have access to me as a state senator. I will ensure that folks have the ability to share every concern and answer questions as your state senator. You know, we have to rebuild public trust in government again. And I think that As someone who served for 20 years and continues to serve in our communities as a school board member and even as a congressional staffer, I understand the issues that are impacting our community and will present solutions that are realistic and implementable. But that begins with ensuring that folks have access to me as their state senator. So moving forward, I believe that everyone in Arizona has a voice, regardless of your political ideology. Rest assured that I am always open to have those tough conversations so that we can find a way to move Arizona forward together. I humbly ask for your vote as state senator for District 11. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The Government Affairs Committee, the residents of Sun City Oro Valley, and I would like to thank each of you for taking the time today to help us understand your positions on key issues in Arizona. We encourage everyone to vote in the November election. If you intend to vote by early ballot, please make sure that you are on Pima County's permanent early voting list. This is especially important if you will be out of town in early November. At the end of this video, we'll be posting information about voter registration and voting for this election, and links to more information about each of the candidates. So thank you again, JoAnna Mendoza and Dr. Perez.
Thank you.
Thank you.